Hello, this is Omar Obidat.
And this is Mariam Sabit.
Welcome to our first of the series for the UAE Competition Law. We're going to walk you through what the UAE Competition Law covers in very exciting topics. To give a background, the UAE Competition Law was enacted for the first time in 2012 and introduced implementing the regulations in 2013. This law is administered by the Ministry of Economy, where the Competition Consumer Protection Department oversees the implementation of this law. Mariam, can you walk me through the scope of this law? Which corporations are exempted? Which actions are covered under it?
Yeah. So basically, the law has three main salient terms. It covers restrictive agreements, which basically are agreements between horizontal and vertical, such as competitors, or with suppliers and resellers between themselves. But bear in mind that the law doesn't actually distinguish between competitors or not. So it's a general obligation on restrictive agreements. It also covers abuse of dominant position, which is when a corporation has 40% of market share in the market. There are certain rules and conditions they need to abide by. And most importantly, it's merger control. So it has a merger control notification system, which basically covers transactions between corporations that can trigger the threshold for filing a notification. So these are the main salient terms for the competition law that basically covers these matters. Now, you've talked about exemptions. And exemptions are a really important topic that we wanted to cover from the outset on the very first episode. Basically, the exemptions would cover the SMEs. There are certain sectorial exemptions in the law. And I wanted to talk with you, Omar, a little bit about what do you think of the SMEs and the sectorial exemptions in the law?
Well, SMEs doesn't have a definition worldwide. What can be a small company in the UAE could be a medium or large size company in another jurisdiction. And the fact is, there is no certification body that tells you that you are an SME or you're a large corporation. So this area still requires clarity. The competition department mentioned on several occasions that a regulation specifying which companies are SME in terms of volume and size will qualify for exemption, but to date, the general SME regulations in the UAE don't quite apply to the exemption under the competition law.
Actually, on that point, there is a regulation, the 2016 one, which we get so many queries about that a lot of our clients tell us, okay, there's an exemption for SMEs, the 2016 regulation, that should be applicable. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a good question. I'll tell you, that's a fallacy, actually. Many people do fall in this trap and say, well, there is an SME regulation and apply the tests for the criteria of what constitutes an SME in that regulation, and then find that they are exempt from the competition law. This is totally against the interpretation of the competition authority, which actually rightfully says the competition law will specify in its regulations or a separate regulation what an SME is. So for the time being, there is no clarity. There is no such definition of what an SME is, and it's yet to be seen. So stay tuned.
Yeah. And our recommendation always when it comes to these kind of matters, especially that when in doubt, just always ask, because a lot of the queries we'd get that some companies would just exempt from themselves and do their own internal analysis that this is not applicable because it's an SME. So for now, I mean, until there's specific regulations from the law, we should definitely look at it on a case-by-case basis.
So a question for you here. You mentioned that the law talks about competition and regulates who is in a dominant position, restrictive agreements, etc. So what comes to mind immediately in the UAE is we have a system called commercial agencies. And, by nature, a commercial agent is actually enjoying a monopolistic position. They are the sole importer / distributor of a product in the UAE and can prevent competitors from importing / distributing in the UAE. Doesn't that easily qualify as contravening the competition law?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. But yes, but that's why the competition law has specifically made a carve out for commercial agencies, but only, and this is again, we get those queries a lot, only insofar in relation to certain provisions that has to do with dividing the market and assigning clients based on geographic. So there's specific regulations in the competition law that carves out that requirement only for commercial agencies. But what we also see that a lot of people fall into the trap that think that commercial agencies are exempt from all the provisions of the competition law.
So a commercial agent can be an exclusive importer distributor and prevent others from engaging that activity.
Yes, correct.
However, if there is a merger or an acquisition taking place by that commercial agent, they are still subject
to the competition law. In addition, as well, to, for example, if they're in a dominant position, they're still subject to the regulations of the dominant positions in that perspective. So one has to really look at the very limited exemption that's given to commercial agencies, and it's not a blanket exemption.
All right. So I think this exemptions, as you read it for the first time, it looks very broad and wide. But you've mentioned on more than one occasion today that the exemptions should be looked at carefully.
Should be looked at carefully and always narrowly. And this is when I come to you and discuss what we've always been having many queries about is the sectorial exemptions. Because a lot of companies and clients would even come to us and say, okay, this sector is exempt according to the law, hence we are not subject to competition law. And that's the first misconception that we want to clear. But I wanted you to explain a little bit your views on the sectorial exemptions particularly.
Well, for many in-house counsel who I've spoken to, they will say, where we are from the pharmaceutical sector or we're from the oil and gas sector, and therefore we're exempt. We're not bothered by the competition law. And the law doesn't really say that.
Yeah.
This law mentions, yes, a lot of sectors, including pharmaceuticals, telecoms, oil and gas, and transportation. But what is transportation? That's such a big topic. Does it include taxis, aviation, shipping, etc.? So when you look at the law, it does mention that these sectors are exempted on the basis that it has, if it has a special legislation addressing competition law. Now, if you look at all of these sectors, whether it's pharmaceutical or transport or gas distribution, I haven't seen a regulator that addresses competition law or merger acquisitions in those laws. So in reality, yes, those sectors are mentioned as exempted, but it's really subject to having a specific regulation addressing competition practices. Now, again, this is an area I think that can be further clarified. The law, when drafted, sure will require to undergo improvement or clarifications. And from the practice, the competition authority will also tell you that they believe the law should be further improved. But overall, I mean, just to conclude today's session, we do have a law, we have implementing regulations.
Yes.
How's the practice progressing in terms of requests or complaints or merger control applications? How do you find it?
Well, I mean, the practice, basically, there are a lot of improvements that require to be made to be in line with international standards and regulations. So basically, I think one of the main topics that we'll be discussing now next for our next episode will be merger control. So there are a lot of elements into assessing relevant market, assessing the remedies, definitions and thresholds. These are matters that we believe should be addressed specifically under the law.
Absolutely. That's a very hot topic. We look forward to speaking to you in our next episode on mergers and acquisitions. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.